Every bank robbery in history shares one assumption. The bank was already open, already watched, already waiting for something to go wrong. But what happens in the window before a bank officially exists when the ribbon is still hanging across the entrance, the staff hasn't walked in yet, and the money is already loaded into the machines? On a cold Monday morning in Winnipeg, a manager raised scissors and smiled for the cameras. The ribbon fell. The first customer inserted a card. Error. He tried the next machine. Error. The next. Nothing. A technician pulled the service logs and went completely still. Sometime between Friday night and Sunday midnight, while the building sat dark and sealed and officially non-existent, every ATM cassette had been emptied without triggering a single alarm, leaving a fingerprint or appearing on a single frame of footage. The vault untouched, the doors intact, the building looked perfect. It was just hollow. This wasn't a robbery. It looked like a system that had quietly failed itself. Where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments, and if you've heard a heist story that felt genuinely impossible, share that too. Gerald Daniel Blanchard was not what you picture when you picture a thief. No record of violence, no dramatic origin story, no moment of desperation that pushed him into a life of crime. He was calm. He wore glasses. He carried a hard-shell briefcase that contained nothing particularly interesting. He spoke quietly enough that people leaned forward to hear him, and he dressed like someone who had a 9-to-5 and a mortgage and absolutely no reason to be detained at customs. Hotel clerks called him Sir. Security guards held doors open for him. He was born in Winnipeg in 1972, raised by a single mother on welfare in a neighborhood that didn't produce many success stories of any kind. What he had, instead of opportunity, was obsession. A compulsive, almost academic need to understand how things worked not just on the surface, not just well enough to use them, but deep down, at the engineering level, at the level where someone made a decision and moved on and hoped no one would ever look too closely at what they'd left behind. That gap between intention and execution, between how a system was designed and how it actually behaved in the real world, was where Blanchard lived. It was where he was most comfortable. And from a very young age, it was where he began to build something that most people would never recognize as a criminal methodology, because it looked far too much like genuine intellectual curiosity. By the time he was a teenager, Blanchard wasn't dabbling, he was conducting research. He checked out trade journals and engineering manuals from the Winnipeg Public Library. He collected patent filings from American lock manufacturers. He read alarm electronics documentation and building permit records and contractor invoices. He built custom bypass tools from watch components and dental picks. He photographed locks in the field, drew their internal schematics by hand, and filed everything in organized binders sorted by manufacturer, model, and year of production. Police who later searched his belongings described finding materials that looked more like a graduate thesis than a criminal's toolkit. He was not trying to pick locks. Picking is brute force. It's a fight against the mechanism. Blanchard wasn't interested in fighting. He was interested in finding the place where the engineer who designed the lock decided it was good enough and moved on. That compromise, that shortcut, that single moment of impatience permanently embedded in the hardware. Because once you find that place, you aren't breaking anything. You're simply walking through a door that was always slightly open, in a way the architect never imagined anyone would think to look for. Most thieves study the defense. Blanchard studied the assumptions underneath the defense, and those are almost never the same thing. Before he ever touched a bank, Blanchard went to Vienna to test his philosophy against something almost untouchable. In June of 1998, he walked into Schönbrunn Palace as a tourist ticket in hand, camera over his shoulder, audio guide in his ear, indistinguishable from the 4 million visitors who pass through that building every year. He moved through the rooms at a normal pace. He listened, he observed. And in one particular room, behind museum glass under Austrian state protection, sat the Star of Empress Sisi, a diamond-covered brooch crafted by the imperial court jeweler in the 1860s. worn in the hair of Empress Elizabeth of Austria, and valued at approximately $2 million. A national treasure, guarded by cameras, alarms, and rotating staff inside a UNESCO World Heritage Site. On his way out, Blanchard stopped at the gift shop and bought a replica. A cheap souvenir with 10 points, a fake pearl at the center, and a pin on the back. The kind of thing any tourist carries home in their carry-on without a second thought. He came back after the palace closed. By the time the morning guides arrived and the first tour groups began moving through the halls, the display case looked exactly as it always had. 10 points, a pearl, small diamonds behind glass. 3 signals, 1 conclusion, and not a single person looked twice. The real star was already on another continent. That moment in Schönbrunn was where Blanchard's entire worldview crystallized into something precise and transferable. A museum doesn't protect an object, it protects the appearance of an object. As long as the shape in the case matches the shape on the label, every security layer in the building, every camera, every alarm, every trained guard on rotation is pointing its full attention at a $10 souvenir. The system trusts its own signals completely. And that trust, that unexamined confidence that what looks correct must be correct, is the most exploitable vulnerability in any security architecture ever built. Austria didn't discover the swap for nearly 3 weeks. When they did, they said nothing, not for months, not for years. For 9 full years, tourists pressed against that glass and photographed a gift shop replica. School children went on field trips to see it. Coffee table books printed glossy images of it. The country had decided that protecting its reputation was more valuable than admitting what had happened. When Blanchard brought that same logic to Winnipeg 6 years later, he wasn't improvising. He was applying a tested theorem. The CIBC branch at Polo Park didn't need to be cracked. It needed to be read the way he had always read, everything carefully, patiently, and from the inside out. Here is the specific gap Blanchard found, buried in a detail that appears in every branch operations manual ever printed, and that almost no one outside the industry ever thinks about. When a new branch opens, the ATM cassettes are preloaded by armored couriers the Friday before the Monday ribbon cutting. The vault circuit runs continuously armed around the clock, monitored, completely isolated, but the customer-facing lobby is different. The ATMs, the motion sensors, the cameras covering the front half of the building, those systems go live on opening day, configured by a local IT installer while branch staff are present, tested in stages, brought online in pieces. Friday night through Sunday midnight, the lobby runs on almost nothing. Blanchard entered through the zone that hadn't been armed yet. He worked inside a sealed building with no active staff, no monitoring, and no one expecting any activity at all. Over 48 hours, the cassettes emptied in stages. $500,000 Canadian moved quietly through a building that the security architecture had not yet agreed to protect. The vault hummed perfectly in the back room, guarding itself with complete fidelity, while the front of the building was being methodically undone. When the manager arrived Monday morning and cut the ribbon with a smile, the branch was already a shell. It just didn't know it yet, and neither did anyone else, for another 45 minutes. They never solved his method. Not for Schönbrunn, not for Polo Park, not for the other cases stacked across multiple countries and more than a decade of work. No police department, no forensic team, no bank security division ever produced a public explanation for the mechanical specifics of how he did what he did. What finally brought him down wasn't an investigation into any of those cases. It was a phone call. November 2006, a hotel room in Cairo. Winnipeg detectives and international partners, including the RCMP, Scotland Yard, and German Federal Police, had been running a wiretap for over a year, listening to Blanchard plan a completely separate operation, large-scale ATM fraud, coordinated by a UK-based criminal organization. Egyptian authorities arrested him at the hotel. He was carrying a laptop, 2 phones, and a passport that didn't belong to him. He was extradited to Winnipeg in January 2007, charged on 16 counts of robbery and fraud, and sentenced to 8 years. Across every case, every country, every charge, not one count of assault, not one weapon, pointed at a human being. The Star of Sisi turned up in a drawer at his grandmother's house during a search warrant for something unrelated. Austria quietly arranged its return. No press conference, no photograph of the handover. Schönbrunn placed it back in the case without ceremony. And Blanchard began giving interviews because, as he put it, the systems weren't going to explain themselves. They never do.